What are some of the benefits when we start to work on our inner child? Because I've dove into it for the last few years here or whatever, meditations and journaling. I see it because I am a better mom, but I would love to know, since you specifically work with women with this, like, what have you seen when we start to work on our inner child?
So, when we start working on our inner child, we are able to bring this greater awareness to our lives. So, to our patterns, the way that we react to other people, we're aware of how we've built our life that is completely a result of the messages and the beliefs that we hold about ourselves and our worthiness and what we feel we deserve. We're also better able to manage our emotions. We're better able to handle our children's emotions. Because when you're not aware of your own emotions, you're not aware of how to process your emotions, you're going to have a very difficult time helping your children through their big emotions. And if there is anything that you know about children, it is that they experience their emotions very loudly because it's new to them. They don't understand what's going on in their body. And our job as parents is to help them understand that. And if by doing the inner child work, you have a better handle on that, you're more aware of what's coming up in your own body so that you can separate your experience from your child's experience and you can truly support them through what they're going through. And ultimately, you become a cycle breaker. You essentially say, like, whatever happened in your childhood is not going to happen this way in my childhood because you're supporting your child differently.
Yeah, that makes sense. I see so much of me and my son and my daughter, but I think the concept of being overwhelmed by emotions really got to me as a child, and I did not know how to deal with it. It's something that human design has helped me a little bit in understanding why that's the case. And then seeing my son's human design, it's like, oh, it makes sense. We have a lot of the same concepts. But I feel like as a child, it was just like, stop being whatever you're doing
Mhm.
and trying to come from a place of like, okay, what are you feeling? You have to use your words. Tell me what you're feeling. Let's process this. And then I'm teaching him breath work and taking a moment before you get reactive. Because when someone's telling you not to be away and you're like, I'm overwhelmed, how am I not supposed to be this way? Telling me isn't going to help me through it. So it's been the hardest but most fulfilling thing, and it's a work in progress. I don't have it all the way figured out, but it's knowing, like, what are the tools I can give him so that he can support himself and not, get to a point where it's just like, "Oh my gosh, I'm so, overwhelmed with this." And then there was a few days ago where my daughter just started out of nowhere, started to be really mean, and I was like, "What is happening?" She was
Mhm.
just tired, and it was just me being like, "Hey, I think we're all a little tired. Maybe we should go to bed early." And she was so relieved.
Mhm.
Instead of me being like, "Why are you talking to me this way? This is inappropriate." It was more of
Mhm.
like, "Hey, what do we need right now?" And I think
Mhm.
you pushing yourself to be awake is not ideal. Let's go to bed early. And she was just like, yes. And I was like, oh, wow. It can be that easy. Instead
Mhm.
of reacting to how they're acting, it's like, what are they needing? Because they're trying to
Right.
communicate with us. They just don't know how to speak it. And sometimes it's just really hard to be like, I'm tired as a kid. I'm
Mhm.
hungry. The basic
Right.
needs, it's really hard to be able to speak that of what we need within us.
Right. The big thing, and I see this a lot when we talk about generational trauma, there's this concept of childhood emotional neglect. And I don't necessarily like the word neglect because it carries like a real heavy, dark connotation. But you touched on it a little bit when our parents, when we experienced a big emotion, when they responded to us in don't cry, it's okay. Like, and even now as an adult, I find myself saying to my child, it's okay. And I have to take myself back and I say, "No, this is not okay." But validating their feelings and their emotions will help them to recognize that this thing that's going on inside my body is not bad. There is no bad emotion. It's something that you're feeling. There's truth there. It is your truth. And having somebody to mirror that back to you and say what you are feeling is acceptable is sometimes all that they need to be able to just kind of ease into it and release that emotion instead of, oh, this is not how I'm supposed to be feeling. So this must be bad. Let me shove it down. And so this childhood emotional neglect, I think it's Dr. Janice or Janice Webb who coined the term. And she basically talks about how when our caregivers couldn't handle our emotions, and some of the things that were said in my house as a child were, big girls don't cry. Or if you want something to cry about, I'll give you something to cry about. That's what it was like growing up in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. It's not that my parents were bad parents. That's what they knew how to do. And so now as an adult, I had to learn how to, number one, feel all of my emotions, because an emotion would come up that I'd be unfamiliar with, and it would send signals to my body that like, no, 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 shut it down, shut it down. This is not okay. So number one, I had to learn how to feel it. I had to learn how, like, what is this emotion? Put a name to that emotion and then allow it to move through my body instead of trying to like hold so tightly to it and shove it down. And once you realize as a parent, when your child is experiencing those emotions, that you have no idea how to do it, you have no process in place that allows you to let your child feel that, because it sends those alarm bells to your body that's like, shut it down, this is not okay.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I always say that like we do the best we can with the tools that we have.
Mhm.
Yeah, a lot of parents in that time period, it's just like that's what their parents did and that's what
Mhm.
their parents did. And that's the whole like generational trauma of like there was so much of like, well, that's just how it was when I grew
Right.
up. And it's like, okay, well, I guess what? I have the beautiful opportunity to change that. And we have the technology to have these tools and like all
Mhm.
this stuff that people didn't have at their fingertips. But it is this idea of, and I have a story and I've said it on the podcast before, but it was one of the most mind-blowing things that I've ever done with my daughter. She was supposed to read in front of hundreds of people at like 4 or 5, I can't remember, she was right around that age, in front of hundreds of people, and she was like, "I'm scared. If I mess up, I'm gonna mess up all the people behind me if I don't do it right." And I was like, I can feel that you feel a lot of pressure and I can see that you're scared and that's okay. And she's like, really? And I was like, yeah, I think what would help you is maybe let's practice so you get more confidence. And if you still don't feel like you can do it, then you have permission for me to tell the teacher you don't want to do it. So I think it was that idea of my initial reaction was like, you're going to be fine. You're gonna be fine. And I had to walk it through and say like, "Okay, let's dissect this a little bit. Let's not just push it to the side and say, 'We need to practice, you're gonna be fine.'" And it was one that gave her the confidence to say, "Oh, yeah, I can practice, and I have the option to say no. I can listen to my body, and if my body says, 'No, I don't wanna do this,' I have the power to do that." And within a week, she was reciting this whole thing without looking at the paper, and she was so proud every day to show us, and so it was beautiful to see that unfold and was like, my initial reaction of what I wanted to do was not right in this moment. I had to take a step back and say, "What would my inner child need?" Because it's normally like, yeah, like you said, "You're fine. You're okay. You can do it." One of my wounds is speaking in public, and actually that's something that has come up with someone that I've kind of been working with, and I passed out in front of a whole class trying to give a presentation, and my family's reaction, they made me feel
Mhm.
worse about it.
Mhm.
And so it made me feel really unsafe. Even if I'm at a big table and I have to like introduce who I am, I would get like the beautiful thing was I was on a retreat and I had this moment in meditation where I saw myself, my future self on stage giving a speech in dedication to my younger self saying, "Look, we did it." And I
Mhm.
was crying, and then the most beautiful thing happened. There was a presentation in the next building. As soon as I had this realization and this moment between my future self and my inner child, everybody started to applause. It was like one of those moments where it was like, oh my gosh, this was it. Kind of back to that idea of thinking that what I needed to process, I couldn't remember. I remembered those things. I just, again, didn't think it was that big of a deal. And then it
Mhm.
started coming up and realizing, oh, okay. And so I personally believe me walking my daughter through that also helped me to be like, oh,
Mhm.
this is what I needed. And was like, oops, that happens. But how can we do better next time so that
Mhm.
you don't have those nerves and you're not prepared for this presentation?
Yeah, absolutely. Listening to your story, I was going to ask you, like, if that had happened to you as a child, how would your parents have reacted? And you so beautifully explained that, like, when you were a child, oh, you're fine. You'll be fine. And that's our knee jerk reaction to our children, is to try to make them feel better, because we don't want them to feel badly. We don't want them to struggle. But what we end up doing is teaching them to disconnect from their emotions and to not trust how they're feeling. And so what ends up happening is that they become adults and they don't trust their intuition. Some people can't even hear their intuition. And so this whole process of healing and reconnecting with your inner child and figuring out those messages that you're carrying into your adulthood will allow your intuition to come to the forefront so that you can trust yourself and how you're feeling and make decisions based on what your body feels it needs.